In other lectures, you have learned about the importance of air and surface temperatures for thermal comfort. To heat or cool buildings, air conditioners, radiators, cool ceilings or floor heating are used. In this lecture, you will learn how the temperature of these heaters and coolers impacts comfort and how this relates to the insulation level of buildings and energy efficiency. In the MOOC Energy Demand in Buildings, you have or will learn how to estimate the needed quantity of heating and cooling to keep a building at a comfortable indoor air temperature. This estimation comes from an energy balance on the building, accounting for energy losses and gains through the construction, the so-called transmission heat transfer, the ventilation and infiltration heat transfer because fresh outdoor air is needed for indoor air quality, the solar heat gains and the internal heat gains by appliances and people. By making such a balance for every hour of a year, you can determine how much heat or cold is needed at any time. The unit for these quantities of heat and cold is watt. This, however, doesn't tell us how to bring the needed heat and cold into the rooms of the building. Let's imagine that you have been doing such a calculation and find that you need 500 watt heating. The energy supply system, like a boiler, will provide this 500 watt. If it was 500 watt cooling, that would be provided by a chiller. Q in the equations on the slide is this 500 watt that must be delivered to the room. To understand how this quantity of energy is supplied to the room, you need to understand two basic heat transfer equations between a body or air at a certain temperature Ts and the indoor air Ti. The above equation is for when the heat or cold are transported by air, like with mechanical ventilation systems, or so-called air conditioning. M is the airflow rate in kilogram per second, and Cp is the specific heat of air, which is the quantity of energy that 1 kilogram of air can take when its temperature changes by 1 degree. Such systems need large quantities of air and therefore large ducts. That is why the next solution is often preferred. The second equation is for this next solution for when heat or cold are transported with water in a radiator or a floor heating or cooling system. It is also for an electrical radiator. Alpha is the convection and radiation coefficient depending on air velocity and design of the radiator, and A is the area of the radiator. Let's start with air systems and take cooling as case. Imagine we need 500 watt cooling. Cp is 1000 joule per kilogram Kelvin. Desired indoor temperature is 24 degrees Celsius. To achieve this 500 watt cooling, we can play with the air supply temperature Ts and with the mass flow rate. The cold air is supplied at temperature Ts, is produced by a chiller placed on the back of the supply unit or further away in an air handling unit. For instance, with a mass flow rate of 0.1 kg per second and Ts is 19 degrees, we get the right result. But we would also get the right result with M is 0.05 and Ts is 14 degrees Celsius, or with M is 0.2 and Ts is 21.5. So there is some kind of freedom here. In practice, as was seen in earlier lectures, this freedom is limited by restrictions on the mass flow rate. A higher mass flow rate in the supply duct means high velocities and therefore noise, unless a larger duct is placed. Another limitation is the supply temperature Ts. If it is very cold, people will feel annoying cold draft. Additionally, from the energy point of view, be aware that the efficiency of a chiller or air conditioner is higher when Ts is higher, so using a high supply temperature Ts will save energy. Last problem is that if the temperature is too low, condensation may occur, so there must be a dew point control system for Ts. It is also about the balance between all these parameters. As for air heaters, it is exactly the same story. Only this time Q is negative because we are talking about heating. That's just a convention to work correctly with our equations. Imagine now we need 500 watt heating. Desired indoor air temperature is 20 degrees. Here too we can play with the air supply temperature Ts and with the mass flow rate. See the 3 examples on the slide. And here too we have freedom, limited by restrictions on the mass flow rate. A high air mass flow rate in the supply duct means noise unless a larger duct is placed. And another limitation is the supply temperature Ts. If it is very hot this time, people may dislike it, as feeling warm air on the head and feeling a large temperature difference between head and feet is known to be uncomfortable. From the viewpoint of energy, if the air conditioner is heat pump based, the use of a low supply temperature will increase the efficiency and therefore save energy. If the air conditioner just uses a boiler or an electrical resistance, this will have little effects on energy savings. All in all, here too, it is a question of balancing conflicting interests. Let's now look at the cases where heat and cold are not transferred with an air system but with water radiators or electrical radiators. In these cases we have a surface transferring its heat or cold to the room air. You also have learned that any surface with a temperature above absolute zero transfers heat to other surfaces and human body by radiation. You may remember that the heat transfer by radiation was depending on the temperatures on the power of 4. You see here the equation with the convective part in the first term and the radiative part in the second term. When the temperatures of the surrounding surfaces T, Y are close enough to each other, the heat transfer can be linearized using just the simple temperature difference between two surfaces. Furthermore, the heat exchanged by radiation between the radiators and the other surfaces in the room will, for a large part, ends up in the air, as the air is continuously leaching the walls, taking this way their heat. So, although it is physically not completely correct, it is of good usage to describe the heat transfer from such a radiator with this equation, separating the alpha coefficient into a convective part and a radiation part, and using the air temperature instead of the wall temperatures. So, in the heat exchange, there is always a convective and a radiative part. When it comes to products on the market, it is very confusing what is called radiant heating and what is called convective heating. In fact, all products always have both, according to the laws of physics. However, in some cases, the device has just one flat plate, like this one. In other cases, the plate is corrugated, like on the radiator above and this picture. Additional plates are added, increasing this way the effective heat transfer surface for convection. So, in general, we can rewrite the heat transfer equation like that, taking into account the outer radiative surface A and the surface for convection AC. The radiative share can then be calculated easily. In general, if the radiative share is higher than 50 to 60%, we will speak about radiant heating. The flat radiator on the picture and most electrical radiant panels are such ones. If the radiative share is lower than 50%, we will call it convective heating. Old-fashioned radiators have in general a radiative share of 20 to 30%. But keep in mind that both radiative and convective heat transfer are always there. Let's look now specifically at the heating mode. We therefore have a hot surface and we need 500 watt heating to keep the room at 20 degrees Celsius. Let's assume, for the sake of demonstration, that the convective surface is twice the radiative one. The radiative one is just a flat surface facing the room. Convective coefficient is 2.5 watt per square meter Kelvin and radiative coefficient is 5. The equation can therefore be written as this. And here too, we can choose different combinations of radiator size A and average radiator temperature Ts. In the first example, the radiator has a temperature of 80 degrees Celsius. It is an average temperature. In fact, the hot water will enter the radiator at 90 degrees and leave it at 70. Never mind, with this temperature, a radiator surface area of 0.83 square meter is needed. In the second example, the radiator has an average temperature of 60 degrees, leading to a surface area of 1.25 square meter. And in the last example, the radiator temperature is only 30 degrees, leading to a surface of 5 square meter. So, the lower the temperature of the radiator, the higher the needed surface area. The temperature levels given here correspond to what we call high temperature heating, medium temperature heating, and low temperature heating. The picture shows an example of radiant heating panel in the ceiling connected to a hot water pipe. They also may be electrical. It can also be floor heating or just common radiators, as we will see in next slide. The problem with high temperature heating is that it cannot be achieved when using renewable energy. That is the subject of the MOOC energy supply in buildings. To achieve an average radiator temperature of 80 degrees, the supply temperature must be 90, and that can be achieved only with a boiler using fossil fuels or at the best biomass or biogas. With such a high temperature, the boiler cannot work in condensing mode, and heat pumps, solar systems, and low temperature geothermal energy are excluded. So that is not good. There is, however, one nice thing about it, and that is comfort. In general, people love this high temperature source, and most important, in old, not well insulated building, it helps compensating for much too cold walls and windows during cold days. In short, it increases the mean radiant temperature MRT. However, it may also increase radiant asymmetry, and in very well insulated buildings, it could cause a too high MRT. At the other side of the spectrum, we have low temperature heating, needing more surface area to provide the required heat. That is why in this case floor heating is used, or even wall heating, or in any case a large surface area of heating panels around the room. With such a low temperature as 30 degrees, we are very happy because renewable-based energy supply can be used. Heat pumps will have a high efficiency at these temperature levels, and solar and geothermal systems can be used. With the right surface area, all needed heat can be supplied. But is it still comfortable? Well, people love warm walls and find floor heating very comfortable as long as the temperature is around 24 degrees C, not exceeding 30 degrees for less than 10% people dissatisfied. So that is good. However, the mean radiant temperature MRT should be kept in the right range too. That is where it can go wrong. If the building is not well insulated, the floor or wall heating will not be able to compensate for the cold walls and windows, leading to a too low MRT. So, even if the needed heat as calculated with the heat balance at the beginning of the lecture is supplied, residents may feel very uncomfortable because the too low MRT. That is why it is strongly recommended to apply low temperature heating only in well-insulated buildings. Another source of discomfort when applying low temperature floor heating may be the inertia of the system. If you feel cold and put the thermostat higher, it will cost a lot of time before the room air temperature increases. This is because of the mass of the floor and walls and the high share of radiative heat. So people have to get used to this and accept to keep the room temperature as constant as possible. An appropriate zoning is also necessary to be able to control separately diverse rooms like living room and bedrooms. Otherwise, rooms may unnecessarily be heated. As for floor covering, almost all materials can be used nowadays. Most producers offer variants of their product optimized for floor heating, that is having a high thermal conductivity, but always keep the allowed floor temperature of the product in mind. Well, and of course, between high and low temperature systems, everything in between is possible. In general, medium temperature is suitable in thermally renovated dwellings that do not achieve new built insulation levels. Note that the pictures in this slide relate to water systems. The findings on comfort are exactly the same for electrical radiators, but the use of electricity for direct heating is not recommended as it is very inefficient, as you can learn in the MOOC Energy Supply for Buildings. Let's look now at the cooling mode. We therefore have a cold surface and we need 500 watt cooling to keep the room at 24 degrees. We assume the same radiative coefficients as before, but in general these panels have no additional convective surface and are essentially radiant, so we'll consider AC is equal to A. The heat transfer equation can therefore be written as this, and here too we can choose different combinations of size A and average temperature Ts of the cooling panel. In the first example, the panel has a temperature of 10 degrees Celsius. It is an average temperature. In fact, chilled water will enter the panel at 13 degrees and leave it at 7. Never mind, with this temperature, a panel surface area of 4.8 square meters is needed. In the second example, the cooling panel has an average temperature of 14 degrees, leading to a surface area of 6.7 square meters. And in the last example, the panel temperature is only 19 degrees, leading to a surface of more than 13 square meters. So, the higher the temperature of the cooling panel, the higher the needed surface area. The temperature levels given here correspond to what we call low temperature cooling, medium temperature, and high temperature cooling. Generally, such cooling panels are suspended in the ceiling, like on the picture, and connected to a chilled water duct. Sometimes they are also found as floor cooling. Note that because of the much larger areas needed than for heating, cooling radiators, as we saw in the previous slide, are never used. Low temperature cooling may be needed when large cooling powers are needed. As we have seen in another lecture, radiant asymmetry will not be a problem for cooling, and such cold panels can help to reduce the MRT when needed. To produce this low temperature, water must be chilled. This takes place in a cooling machine, also called chiller. The efficiency of a chiller decreases a lot when low temperature must be produced, so this is not very efficient. Geothermal cold cannot be used either. Condensation on the panels may be the biggest problem. Air at 24 degrees and 41% relative humidity condensates at 10 degrees. So, unless the room air is very dry, the cooling plate will become wet. It will rain inside. That's why such low temperature systems are not recommended. Additionally, the panels are hard, so not very favorable to the acoustic. Let's now look at the other extremity of the temperature spectrum. High temperature cooling, which is when the cooling panel temperature is kept above 16 degrees Celsius. In this case, larger surface areas are needed, by which the acoustic problem may worsen. It is, however, a question of placing enough absorbing materials elsewhere. Radiant asymmetry is not a problem as well, but the MRT will not be reduced a lot. So these systems are to be used in already well-insulated buildings where windows and walls are not expected to become very warm. From the viewpoint of energy, the chiller will have a very high efficiency at these high temperatures, and geothermal or river cold can be used, as well as aquifer thermal energy storage, the so-called ATES. And what about condensation? Well, on a panel at 16 degrees, air at 24 degrees Celsius can condensate if the relative humidity is above 60%, so the humidity has to be kept lower. If a panel temperature of 20 degrees is used, which may be done with floor cooling, then the relative humidity has to be kept below 80%, which is more doable. When such a floor cooling system is applied, it will always be combined with a dew point control and switched off if the relative humidity is too high. Last but not least, many buildings have a system with an intermediate temperature, and depending on the design will share advantages and disadvantages of the extremes. In this lecture you have learned about diverse heating and cooling delivery systems in rooms and how they relate to energy use of renewables, and thermal and acoustical quality. You know now that heat and cold can be delivered in rooms either by injecting warm or cold air into the room. The choice for the mass flow rates must be done in relation with the supply temperature and account for noise production and draft. Such air systems work at temperature levels with which efficient energy generation can be done and renewables can be used. However, they are not always comfortable and they ask for large ducts throughout the building, taking a lot of place. That's why heat and cold delivery by convection and radiation around warm or cold bodies such as radiators, cooling and heating panels or floor cooling and heating systems may be preferred. We looked briefly at the underlying heat transfer mechanisms and made an inventory of advantages and disadvantages of both methods, both in heating and cooling modes. When using convective and radiant surfaces, low temperature heating and high temperature cooling are energy efficient and allow for the use of renewable resources. However, well-insulated buildings are needed when using such systems, otherwise the MRT may not ensure comfort. In cooling mode, attention must be paid to acoustic and, even more important, to condensation control. Floor systems are reacting slowly to changes, which may be annoying for residents if not used to it. I hope you have enjoyed this too long lecture in which many aspects of this course and previous MOOCs were coupled together. Thank you for your attention.